The gravel crunches under his boots at 6:47 in the morning. Ranger Mori Ken has walked this stretch of the Kiso River Trail every day for 11 years. He knows where the path dips near the second bend. He knows which cedar tree leans too far over the water after a heavy storm. He knows the exact moment the light breaks through the canopy and turns the river the color of old bronze. This morning, the light is doing that. He stops for 3 seconds the way he always does. Then he hears something that does not belong. Not a bird, not the river. Something smaller and much closer. He turns his head slowly, the way you do when you are not quite sure you heard anything at all. Sitting on the gravel bank 12 feet away is a baby Japanese macaque. It is looking directly at him, not running, not hiding, just sitting there in the gray morning light, both small hands resting on its knees, watching his face. Ken does not move. The baby does not move. For 5 full seconds, neither of them does anything at all. Then the baby stands up, walks straight toward him, and wraps both hands around his right index finger. He looks down at those tiny fingers curled around his. He will think about this moment for a long time afterward. Not because of what the animal did, because of what he understood. The Kiso River Valley in Nagano Prefecture sits at the edge of the Japanese Alps, where the mountains press close enough to the water that the forest seems to lean in and drink. In late April, the valley holds a green so dense and layered it registers in the chest before it registers in the eyes. Cedar and hinoki cypress grow thick from the ridgeline down to the river's edge roots, traveling through volcanic rock and river gravel reaching toward water. They have been drinking for a century. The canopy breaks in long irregular strips, and morning light falls through in pale shifting columns that move whenever the upper wind moves. The river is running high this week after 4 days of hard rain. It is pale gray-green, the color of weathered glass, moving fast enough that the sound of it fills the valley from ridge to ridge and leaves no room for silence. Mori Ken has been a wildlife ranger in this valley since he was 24 years old. He is 35 now. He grew up 2 hours south of here in a small town at the foot of the mountains where his father ran a hardware store and spent his weekends fishing the smaller tributaries of this same river system. His father knew the names of things, the insects on the water, the stones in the riverbed, the exact week each spring when the trout moved upstream not from books, but from 30 years of standing in the same water and paying attention. Ken learned early that this was a different kind of knowing than the kind you build in a classroom. Both kinds matter. Only one of them tells you what to do when the situation in front of you has no entry in any manual. He moves through the forest, the way men do after a decade of learning from it quietly, without wasted motion, each boot coming down heel first and rolling forward before the full weight commits. It took him 3 years to stop thinking about how he walked and simply walk. His pack carries water, a first aid kit, a radio, and a laminated species observation sheet he has been refilling with the same printed template for 6 years. He left the ranger station at 6:15. The frost on the equipment shed roof had not yet melted when he locked the door behind him. By 6:40, he had reached the second bend where the trail drops close to the gravel bank and the river is loudest. The macaque troop that ranges through this section of valley is one he has been observing for 6 years. 31 individuals, roughly the number shifting each spring with new births. He knows the dominant male by the particular scar that runs from the left ear toward the jaw, and by the way he carries his shoulders when he walks slightly forward, a posture that projects authority in a way that is entirely unconscious. He knows the 3 elder females who determine each morning's foraging direction. He knows the juveniles by behavior more than by face, the bold ones who push forward into any new situation, the careful ones who hold back and watch until they understand what they are looking at. He has not named any of them. That decision required more discipline when he made it 11 years ago than he had anticipated, and it still requires some maintenance now. 20 minutes before the encounter at the river, he had heard the troop moving through the upper canopy. Adult macaques traveling through cedar branches make a sound, unlike anything else in this forest. Rhythmic, dense, the sound of significant weight moving with confidence through high places. He had registered their direction without breaking stride northeast toward the persimmon grove on the second ridge, which is where they go in late April when the new growth is freshest. He had placed them in his mental map of the valley and kept walking, which is exactly why the infant on the gravel bank stopped him. He put the animal at 4 to 5 months from its size and the condition of its face. The early pink flush of infancy had faded, the facial skin darkening toward the red-brown of a juvenile. But the body was still compact and incompletely proportioned, the limbs not yet carrying the length they would have by 6 months. At 4 to 5 months, a macaque infant is beginning to make short, independent movements, away from its mother, exploratory hops of a few feet, brief investigations of objects on the ground near her. It returns to her constantly. It uses her as a fixed point, the way a man on unfamiliar terrain uses a landmark. Everything else is measured from her. A 4 to 5 month infant does not cross 40 meters of open gravel and dense undergrowth alone. It does not arrive on a riverbank and sit with both hands on its knees, watching a human face with the focused stillness of an animal that is not lost, but waiting. Ken has seen lost animals. He knows what lost looks like, the unfocused scanning, the repeated, circling the vocalizations that start loud and become desperate as the animal's world fails to respond. This infant was doing none of those things. It was sitting. It was watching. And when he turned toward it and held still, it stood up and walked to him and took his finger. He let it hold. He felt the grip, the small fingers wrapping around his index finger, with a strength that surprised him. The kind of grip that comes from an animal that has spent every waking hour of its short life clinging to something. The infant looked up at his face. Its eyes were dark brown pupils, read in the low morning light, and the expression in them was something he did not have a clean professional word for. It was not distress. It was not the blank vacancy of shock. It was the face of something that had been waiting, and had now found what it was waiting for. The infant made no sound. That was the detail that moved through him first before the analysis. At 4 to 5 months, macaque infants are vocal animals. They chirp and grunt and produce short contact calls that keep them located for their mothers across distance and dense vegetation. Silence in an infant this age means the animal has been vocalizing for a long time already and has temporarily run out. The infant held his finger for 3 seconds. Then it released, turned, and took 4 steps toward the undergrowth at the edge of the gravel bank. It stopped. It looked back at him. 4 more steps, another stop, another look back. Ken stood with his hands still half extended, and he was not thinking about what the infant wanted. He was thinking about the troop. Northeast, 20 minutes ago, 31 individuals moving together through the upper canopy toward the persimmon grove. The troop moves as a unit in the morning foraging hour. A mother with a 4-month infant does not fall behind. She is in the core of the group, where the infant is safest, where the collective warmth and vigilance of the troop surrounds them both, unless something had stopped her. Unless she had gone down somewhere between the overnight roost and the morning foraging ground. And the troop had moved on without her, the way troops sometimes do when a member cannot keep pace. And the infant had stayed with her through the night and into the early morning, and then following the only reliable thing in its world. Besides, its mother had moved toward the river and the sound of boots it had been hearing at this hour for every morning of its short life. Ken looked at the infant at the edge of the brush. He looked at the direction it had come from southwest, back toward the old-growth cedar stand where this troop roosted on cold nights. He measured the distance in his mind, 40 meters through Fuki, and exposed root systems a long way for a 4-month animal to travel alone long enough that the mother had been down for hours before the infant decided to move. He took 1 step forward. The infant turned and moved into the brush. He followed. The rules governing how he works with this troop are rules he helped write. He believes in the reasoning behind them, years of accumulated evidence about what human proximity costs wild animals in stress and behavioral disruption, the slow erosion of the instincts that keep them alive. He was also aware, walking through the Fuki with cold dew soaking into his pants, that rules are written for general conditions, and this situation was specific. The infant was not leading him. He understood that clearly. The infant was a 4-month animal, moving through familiar terrain in the direction it had come from, returning toward its mother the way it had been doing for every waking hour of its life. It was moving. He was following. Those were two different things. What was leading him was 11 years of this valley. The troops' roost location, their direction of travel that morning, the distance between the river and the old cedar stand, and the simple arithmetic of a mother who was not where she was supposed to be. He pushed through a stand of fuki that transferred a cold stripe of dew across both forearms. The infant moved with low urgent efficiency through the vegetation. Not exploring, not hesitating, moving the way animals move when they are returning somewhere, rather than going somewhere new. He kept pace by reading the disturbance in the leaves, rather than trying to keep the animal in direct sight. 30 meters in the ground began to rise. River gravel gave way to forest floor, soft deep, with accumulated years of cedar needle and leaf fall. The surface broken by surface roots that arched from the soil in shapes that required attention. He placed each boot carefully. The cedar stand closed around him. The river sound fell behind, reduced to a background pressure, and the forest settled into the particular quiet of old trees. Not silent, but ordered, each sound in its place and nothing competing. 40 meters from the river, the infant stopped. It sat down in the leaf litter between two large surface roots. It looked at him. Then it looked to its left into the space where the roots of the largest cedar diverged and created a bowl of dark soil between them. And for the first time since the gravel bank, it made a sound. Not a contact call. Not the clear, bright chirp of a healthy infant locating its mother across a safe distance. Something lower and compressed, a sound that came from the chest rather than the throat, with almost no projection in it. The sound of an animal that had been making noise for a long time and had nearly used it all up. Ken looked where the infant was looking. Between the roots in the depression of soil where they spread apart, the mother was lying on her side. She was alive. The rib cage moved shallow, too fast, but moving. One eye was open, and it found him within the first second, tracking with the sharp, involuntary attention of an animal that is too exhausted to pretend indifference. She did not try to move when she saw him. Ken crouched at the edge of the root system and read the situation the way he had learned to read anything in this valley, starting with what he could confirm and moving outward from there. She was alive and conscious. She had been here long enough for the body to reach the particular stillness that follows hours of attempting to solve a problem it cannot solve on its own. Her right hind leg was wedged between the second and third surface root. From 4 feet away, he could see that the leg was not fractured. The angle was wrong, but not catastrophically wrong. No swelling visible through the fur. No blood, no sign of the kind of impact damage that leaves a limb at an unnatural rest. What he saw was geometry. The roots had diverged and created a narrowing gap, and at some point in the night, she had put her leg into that gap, and her own weight coming down had wedged it in a configuration that gave her nothing to push against. Every attempt to free herself by pulling upward would have tightened the compression rather than releasing it. He had seen this same mechanical trap close on a deer's foreleg 7 years ago on the eastern bank 3 kilometers north of here. That animal had been down for less than 2 hours and had still been fighting when he found it. This female was not fighting. She had been here since before the rain stopped, which put her on the ground for at minimum 4 hours, more likely 6. He stayed crouched and watched her for a full minute. Not out of uncertainty. Out of the discipline his first supervisor had spent 2 years instilling in him as a 24-year-old who wanted to fix everything immediately. Read before you act, because the action you take in the first 30 seconds shapes everything that follows. Her breathing rate was elevated. He counted 22 respirations in the minute he watched against the resting rate of a healthy adult female, which runs between 12 and 15. Her muscle tone in the visible limbs was reduced. The kind of reduction that comes after sustained effort has depleted the muscle's available resources. The fur along her left shoulder was damp and slightly matted from hours of contact with cold, wet soil. The infant had moved while he was watching and was now sitting 2 feet from her face, both small hands pressed flat on the leaf litter, leaning slightly forward. Not touching her. Present. Close enough to close the distance, instantly far enough to not add to her distress. It was doing Ken thought exactly what it should be doing. He looked at the root configuration again. The wedged leg needed to move approximately 10 centimeters left and slightly upward to clear the root. The root itself was not going anywhere. It was the tree, an expression of something that had been growing here since before his father was born. The leg had to move, and to move it, he had to get his hands between the roots and onto a wild, adult female macaque that had been trapped and frightened since before dawn. He was fully aware of what that could mean. An adult female Japanese macaque runs 8 to 10 kilograms and carries canine teeth capable of serious damage to an unprotected hand. The bite reflex of a trapped wild primate is well established, and he did not dismiss it. But he had been in this valley for 11 years. He had walked the same trails at the same hours through every season. This troop had been encountering him at close range for 6 of those years, long enough that his presence on their range had become a recognized fixture rather than an intrusion. He was not her ally. He was not safe in any absolute sense. But he was known, and known occupies a different category than unknown, and in that category there was sometimes room for what needed to happen next. He moved to the left side of the root configuration, where the gap between the first and second root was wide enough for his arms. He moved slowly. He kept his body low. His center of gravity back, his movements small and without abruptness. He kept his eyes on the leg and the root and the space between them, not on her face. She did not vocalize as he approached. She did not shift her body into a defensive arrangement. She lay still and watched his hands, with the focused attention of an animal that has made some kind of assessment and is waiting to see if the assessment holds. He put his right hand between the roots. The soil was cold and damp, the surface of the root smooth and slightly fibrous under his fingers. He found the point of contact between the root and her leg and traced it the angle, the depth of compression, the direction the leg needed to travel. 10 centimeters left and slightly up. He placed his left hand on her leg. She exhaled a long, slow breath, longer than the ones before it. The kind that comes when something a body has been bracing against is no longer coming. He moved the leg left. 2 centimeters. 5. He felt the resistance change. At 8 centimeters, the geometry beginning to open, and at 10, the leg came free. He kept his hands where they were and waited. She lay still for nearly a full minute. Then, she drew the leg slowly toward herself, folding it in against her body, and her left arm, which had been pressed flat against the cold soil for hours, lifted and came around the infant, not dramatically. The arm moved to where it had been trying to move since before dawn and arrived. The infant pressed in against her chest without hesitation, both fists closing on her fur with the full grip of 4 months of practiced holding. And it buried its face in the warmth there and went still. Ken sat back against the adjacent root. His knees were wet through from the fuki. His right forearm had a long, shallow scratch from a root edge that he had not noticed until now. The forest continued its morning work around them. Birds cycling through their post-dawn sequence, the cedar canopy beginning to warm as the sun reached the eastern ridge, light finding its way down through the crown in long irregular shafts that crossed the leaf litter and shifted and crossed again. She lay still for a long time. Then she pushed herself upright. Front limbs, first weight transferring forward, the right hind leg coming down. Last touching the ground carefully, the way you touch something you are not sure of. She stood. She put weight on the leg. There was a hitch in it. A slight loading irregularity at mid-stance, the signature of soft tissue compression that would resolve with movement over the coming days. Nothing requiring anything further from him. She looked at him once from her standing position. He kept his eyes at the level of her shoulder, the neutral gaze that communicates neither threat nor demand. She turned and walked into the cedar shadow. The infant's face was visible over her shoulder. For a moment small and dark, the eyes catching a shaft of morning light, and then the forest took them. And the sound of her movement diminished through the trees, and the cedar stand returned to its ordinary quiet. Ken sat against the root a while longer. He was thinking about the troop's direction that morning, and the infant's direction on the gravel bank. and the way those two vectors had pointed at each other across 40 meters of undergrowth, like two lines on a map, intersecting at a single point. He had not been led here. He had read the valley. The infant had been the last piece of information, not the first the detail that completed the picture rather than the picture itself. But it had taken 11 years to be the kind of man who could read that picture in the time it takes a small animal to cross 12 feet of gravel and take hold of your finger. He stood up, checked his pack, and started back toward the river. The rest of that morning's patrol passed the way. Most mornings do in the accumulation of small observations, none of them dramatic, all of them the work. He checked the water level markers at the northern measurement point. He assessed the wind-damaged branch on the Hinoki near the trail junction, hanging for 3 weeks now, long enough to have become a decision that needed making before the tree made it for him. He found fresh sero scat on a rock shelf above the western bank, the small mountain ungulate using the same shelf it had used since the previous autumn. Around 11, he heard the troop in the upper canopy again moving south on the return arc of their morning foraging route. He stopped and counted what the canopy allowed him. 7 adults confirmed more moving in the sections of crown he could not see through. He stayed still and listened to the spacing between them. Easy, unhurried, the particular loose rhythm of animals that are full and warm and have nothing pressing to resolve. A troop with nothing wrong in it. He stayed still until they passed beyond his range. He knew she was in there somewhere, moving with the others on that repaired leg. The infant on her back in the warm cedar-filtered sun. He did not need to confirm it. The sound of the troop was confirmation enough. He ate lunch on a flat boulder above the river at noon. He had been eating on this same boulder for 9 years, long enough that the rock itself felt like part of the routine, wide enough to sit comfortably angled, just right to catch the midday sun. The view down to the river unobstructed. The water was still high and running fast below him. Pale gray-green, throwing back irregular flashes of light where it moved over the shallower stones. He thought about his father while he ate the hardware store the weekend, fishing, the way his father could read a stretch of river and know where the fish were holding before he could see them. His father had fished the same tributaries of this river system for 30 years. Ken was 11 years into this valley. He was beginning to understand what 30 would feel like. He finished his rice, stowed the foil, and continued south. On the return route, the eastern bank took him past the narrow gravel stretch where the morning had begun. He paused there for a moment. The bank was empty, the fuki leaves trembling at the edge in the light afternoon breeze. 40 meters back through that undergrowth was a cedar tree with soft compression marks in the soil between its largest roots. He had left nothing there. He had taken nothing away. He turned and kept walking. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday in mid-May, Ken was at the observation point above the persimmon grove on the second ridge. The grove was at its fullest new growth, dense on every branch. The leaves that pale bright green that only lasts 2 weeks before it deepens into summer. The troop spread through it, the way they always spread through a food-rich area. Individuals fanning out across the canopy, the low sounds of feeding carrying down to where Ken stood. He found the mother in the 3rd minute. She was in the mid-canopy of a large persimmon on the eastern edge of the grove, moving along a branch with the unhurried ease of an animal that has been using this tree for years. Her right hind leg carried its full weight. The hitch was gone. The infant was not on her back. He scanned the nearby branches and found it on the ground, at the base of the tree, 4 feet below, its mother sitting in a small patch of sunlight that had broken through the canopy, turning a dried persimmon over in both hands, the fruit flattened and papery from surviving the winter under the leaf litter. At 5 months, the infant was beginning to spend short periods on the ground, while the mother fed above. This was normal. This was, in fact, a milestone, the first tentative rehearsals of independence, the mother allowing it, because she was close enough to descend in seconds, if needed. Ken watched from 30 meters away and held still. The infant lost interest in the dried fruit. Put it down. Looked around the base of the tree with the alert, slightly overwhelmed expression of an animal encountering open ground as an environment rather than something that simply passes below. Then it looked up, not at its mother. Across the 30 meters of grove floor through the dappled mid-May light, directly at Ken. He did not move. The infant held his gaze with the same focused, assessing stillness he had seen on the gravel bank 3 weeks ago. Then it sat down, both hands on its knees. The exact posture of a cold April morning on a gravel bank, the river loud behind it, the frost not yet off the shed roof. Ken stood in the grove light and felt something settle in his chest. Not sentiment. Something quieter than that, the feeling of a thing completing itself without announcement in the ordinary light of a Tuesday in May. 3 seconds. Then the infant stood up, turned and climbed back up the bark of the persimmon tree toward its mother. Not scrambling, not urgent. Just climbing, the small hands and feet finding their holds with the growing confidence of an animal learning week by week what its body can reach. It gained the branch where its mother was feeding and tucked itself against her side. She did not look down at the patch of ground where the infant had been sitting. She did not look across the grove at Ken. She kept feeding, moving slowly along the branch, the infant settling against her in the position it had occupied for every hour of its life that mattered. Ken watched until the troop moved deeper into the grove and the canopy closed around them. He stood in the quiet of the empty observation point for a moment. Then he turned and continued his patrol. North to the measurement point, west to the logging road, south along the river, back to the station. Heel first quietly the valley in its mid-May state around him, the green at its most saturated, the light clean and direct the river, dropping back toward its normal level after the April rains. The infant had not needed anything from him this time. It had come down from the tree, sat in a patch of sunlight, and looked at him across 30 meters of grove floor. Then it had gone back to its mother. That was all. That was everything. Ken walked south along the river and let the morning finish itself around him. The cedar crowns moved in the warm May wind. The water caught the afternoon light in long broken flashes over the stones. He had been watching this valley long enough to know that most of what it offers without announcement in the weight of a small grip on one finger, in the sound of a troop moving unhurried through spring canopy in the 3 seconds a 5-month animal chooses to sit still and look at the man who was there when it needed someone to be there before climbing back to where it belongs. You had to be paying attention. You had to have been paying attention for long enough that the valley trusted you with it. He kept walking. The river ran beside him, the way it always ran, carrying everything downstream, indifferent to what it carried, continuous in the way that only very old things are continuous. He walked through all of it the way a man walks through a place he has given enough of himself to deserve, not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense of belonging, that comes when a place has needed something from you and you were ready when it asked.